Good morning, children. It's Grandma Carla, and I'm ready to read another Beverly Cleary book. And this one is called Henry Huggins. Henry Huggins. And Henry Huggins was written a while ago. It's written back, I think, in the 1950s. But Henry Huggins is a series of books by Beverly Cleary, and I can't wait to read the first one. So, here we go. Henry Huggins, Henry and Ribs, Chapter 1. Henry Huggins was in the 3rd grade. His hair looked like a scrubbing brush, and most of his grown-up front teeth were in. He lived with his mother and father in a square white house on Klickitat Street. Except for having his tonsils out when he was 6 and breaking his arm falling out of a cherry tree when he was 7, nothing much happened to Henry. I wish something exciting would happen, Henry often thought. But nothing very interesting ever happened to Henry, at least not until one Wednesday afternoon in March. Every Wednesday after school, Henry rode downtown on the bus to go swimming at the YMCA. After he swam for an hour, he got on the bus again and rode home, just in time for dinner. It was fun, but not really exciting. When Henry left the YMCA on this particular Wednesday, he stopped to watch a man tear down a circus poster. Then, with 3 nickels and 1 dime in his pocket, he went to the corner drugstore to buy a chocolate ice cream cone. He thought that he would eat the ice cream cone, just get on the bus, drop his dime in the slot, and ride home. That is not what happened. He bought the ice cream cone and paid for it with 1 of his nickels. On the way out of the drugstore, he stopped to look at funny books. It was a free look because he only had 2 nickels left. He stood there licking his chocolate ice cream cone and reading one of the funny books when he heard a thump, thump, thump. Henry turned, and there behind him was a dog. The dog was scratching himself. He wasn't any special kind of dog. He was too small to be a big dog, but on the other hand, he was much too big to be a little dog. He wasn't a white dog because parts of him were brown and other parts were black, and in between there were yellowish patches. His ears stood up and his tail was long and thin. The dog was hungry. When Henry licked, he licked. When Henry swallowed, he swallowed. "Hello, you old dog," Henry said. "You can't have my ice cream cone." Swish, swish, swish went the tail. "Just 1 bite," the dog's brown eyes seemed to say. "Go away," ordered Henry. He wasn't very firm about it. He patted the dog's head. The tail wagged harder. Henry took 1 last lick. "Oh, all right," he said. "If you're that hungry, you might as well have it." The ice cream cone disappeared in 1 gulp. "Now go away," Henry told the dog. "I have to catch the bus for home." He started for the door. The dog started too. "Go away, you skinny old dog." Henry didn't say it very loudly. "Go on home." The dog sat at Henry's feet. Henry looked at the dog, and the dog looked at Henry. "I don't think you've got a home. You're awful thin. Your ribs show right through your skin." "Thump, thump, thump," replied the tail. "And you haven't got a collar," said Henry. He began to think. If only he could keep the dog. He had always wanted a dog of his very own, and now he had found a dog that wanted him. He couldn't go home and leave a hungry dog on the street corner. If only he knew what his mother and father would say. He fingered the 2 nickels in his pocket. That was it. He would use 1 of the nickels to phone his mother. "Come on, Ribsy. Come on, Ribs, old boy. I'm going to call you Ribsy because you're so thin." The dog trotted after the boy to the telephone booth in the corner of the drugstore. Henry shoved him into the booth and shut the door. He had never used a payphone before. He had put a telephone book on the floor. He had to put the telephone book on the floor and stand on tiptoe on it to reach the mouthpiece. He gave the operator his number and dropped his nickel into the coin box. "Hello, Mom?" "Why, Henry!" His mother sounded surprised. "Where are you?" "At the drugstore, near the Y." Ribs began to scratch. Thump, thump, thump. Inside the telephone booth, both the thumps sounded loud and hollow. "For goodness sakes, Henry, what's that noise?" his mother demanded. Ribs began to whimper and then to howl. "Henry," Mrs. Higgins shouted, "are you all right?" "Yes, I'm all right," Henry shouted back. He never could understand why his mother always thought something had happened to him when nothing ever did. "That's just Ribsy." "Ribsy?" His mother was exasperated. "Henry, will you please tell me what's going on?" "I'm trying to," said Henry. Ribsy howled louder. People were gathering around the phone booth to see what was going on. "Mother, I found a dog. I sure wish I could keep him. He's a good dog, and I'll feed him and wash him and everything. Please, Mom?" "I don't know, dear," his mother said. "You'll have to ask your father." "Mom," Henry wailed, "that's what you always say." Henry was tired of standing on tiptoe, and the phone booth was getting warm. "Mom, please say yes, and I'll never ask for another thing as long as I live." "Well, all right, Henry. I guess there isn't any reason why you shouldn't have a dog, but you'll have to bring him home on the bus. Your father has the car today, and I can't come after you. Can you manage?" "Sure, easy. And Henry, please don't be late. It looks as if it might rain." "All right, Mom." Thump, thump, thump. "Henry, what's that thumping noise?" "It's my dog, Ribsy. He's scratching a flea." "Oh, Henry," Mrs. Higgins moaned. "Couldn't you have found a dog without fleas?" Henry thought that it was a good idea to hang up. "Come on, Ribs. We're going home on the bus." When the big green bus stopped in front of the drugstore, Henry picked up his dog. Ribsy was heavier than he expected. He had a hard time getting him into the bus and was wondering how he would get a dime out of his pocket when the driver said, "Say, Sonny, you can't take that dog on the bus." "Why not?" asked Henry. "It's a company rule, Sonny. No dogs on buses." "Golly, mister, how am I going to get him home? I just have to get him home." "Sorry, Sonny. I didn't make the rule. No animals can ride on buses unless it's inside a box." "Well, thanks anyway," Henry said doubtfully and lifted Ribsy off the bus. "Well, I guess we'll have to get a box, a big box." "I'll get you onto the next bus somehow," promised Henry. He went back into the drugstore, followed closely by Ribsy. "Hey, have you got a big box I could have, please?" he asked the man at the toothpaste counter. "I need one big enough for my dog." The clerk leaned over the counter to look at Ribsy. "A cardboard box?" he asked. "Yes, please," said Henry, wishing the man would hurry. He didn't want to be late getting home. The clerk pulled a box out from under the counter. "This hair tonic carton is the only one that I have. I guess it's big enough, but why anyone would want to put a dog in a cardboard box, I can't understand." The box was about 2 feet square and 6 inches deep. On one end was printed, "Don't let them call you Baldy," and on the next, "Try our large economy size." There's a picture of him dragging Ribsy in the box that says, "Try our large economy size." Henry thanked the clerk, carried the box out of the bus stop, and put it on the sidewalk. Ribsy padded after him. "Get in, fellow," Henry commanded. Ribsy understood. He stepped into the box and sat down just as the bus came around the corner. Henry had to kneel to pick up the box. It was not a very strong box, and he had to put his arms under it. He staggered as he lifted it, feeling like the strong man who lifted weights at the circus. Ribsy lovingly licked his face with his wet pink tongue. "Hey, cut that out," Henry ordered. "You better be good if you're going to ride on the bus with me." The bus stopped at the curb. When it was Henry's turn to get on, he had trouble finding the step because he couldn't see his feet. He had to try several times before he hit it. Then he discovered that he had forgotten to take his dime out of his pocket. He was afraid to put the box down for fear that Ribsy might escape. He turned sideways to the driver and asked politely, "Will you please take the dime out of my pocket for me? My hands are full." The driver pushed his cap back on his head and exclaimed, "Full? I should say they are full. And just where do you think you're going with that animal?" "Home," said Henry in a small voice. The passengers were staring, and most of them were smiling. The box was getting heavier every minute. "Not on this bus you're not," said the driver. "But the man on the last box said I could take the dog on the bus in a box," protested Henry, who was afraid he couldn't hold the dog much longer. "He said it was a company rule." "He meant a big box tied shut, a box with holes punched in it for the dog to breathe through." Henry was horrified to hear Ribsy growl. "Shut up," he ordered. Ribsy began to scratch his left ear with his left hind foot. The box began to tear. Ribsy jumped out of the box and off the bus, and Henry jumped after him. The bus pulled away with a puff of exhaust. "Now see what you've done. You spoiled everything." The dog hung his head and tucked his tail between his legs. "If I can't get you home, how can I keep you?" Henry sat down on the curb to think. It was so late and the clouds were so dark that he didn't want to waste time looking for a big box. His mother was probably beginning to worry about him. People were stopping on the corner to wait for the next bus. Among them, Henry noticed an elderly lady carrying a large paper shopping bag full of apples. The shopping bag gave him an idea. Jumping up, he snapped his fingers at Ribs and ran back into the drugstore. "You back again?" said the toothpaste clerk. "What do you want this time? String and paper to wrap your dog in?" "No, sir," said Henry. "I want one of those big nickel shopping bags." He laid his last nickel on the counter. "Well, I'll be darned," said the clerk, and he handed the bag across the counter. Henry opened the bag and set it up on the floor. He picked up Ribsy and shoved him hind feet first into the bag, and then he pushed his front feet in. A lot of Ribsy was left over. The clerk was leaning over the counter watching. "I guess I'll have to have some string and paper too," Henry said, "if I can have some free." "Well, now I've seen everything." The clerk shook his head as he handed a piece of string and a big sheet of paper across the counter. Ribsy whimpered, but he held still while Henry wrapped the paper loosely around his head and shoulders and tied it with the string. The dog made a lumpy package, but by taking one handle of the bag in each hand, Henry was able to carry it to the bus stop. He didn't think that the bus driver would notice him. It was getting dark, and a crowd of people, most of them with packages, was waiting on the corner. A few spatters of rain hit the pavement. This time Henry remembered his dime. Both of his hands were full, so he held the dime in his teeth and stood behind the woman with the bag of apples. Ribsy wiggled and whined, even though Henry tried to pet him through the paper. When the bus stopped, he climbed on behind the lady, quickly set the bag down, dropped his dime in the slot, picked up the bag, and squirmed through the crowd to a seat beside a fat man near the back of the bus. Henry sighed with relief. The driver was the same one that he had met on the first bus, but Ribs was on the bus at last. Now, if he could only keep him quiet for 15 minutes, they would be home, and Ribsy would be his for keeps. The next time the bus stopped, Henry saw Scooter McCarthy, a fifth grader at school, get on and make his way through the crowd to the back of the bus. Just my luck, thought Henry. I'll bet he wants to know what's in my bag. "Hi," said Scooter. "Hi," said Henry. "What you got in the bag?" asked Scooter. "None of your beeswax," answered Henry. Scooter looked at Henry. Henry looked at Scooter. Crackle, crackle, crackle went the bag. Henry tried to hold it more tightly between his knees. "There's something alive in that bag," Scooter said accusingly. "Shut up, Scooter," whispered Henry. "Ah, shut up yourself," said Scooter. "You've got something alive in that bag." By this time, the passengers at the back of the bus were staring at Henry and his package. Crackle, crackle, crackle. Henry tried to pat Ribsy again through the paper. The bag crackled even louder, and then it began to wiggle. Come on, tell us what's in the bag, coaxed the fat man. Nothing, stammered Henry. Just something I found. Maybe it's a rabbit, suggested one passenger. I think it's kicking. No, it's too big for a rabbit, said another. I'll bet it's a baby. I'll bet you kidnapped a baby, said Scooter. I did not. Ribs began to whimper and then to howl. Crackle, 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 thump, thump, thump. Ribsy scratched his way out of the bag. Well, I'll be doggone, exclaimed the fat man, and he began to laugh. I'll be doggone. It's just a skinny old dog, said Scooter. He is not. He's a good dog. Henry tried to keep Ribsy between his knees. The bus lurched around a corner and started to go uphill. Henry was thrown against the fat man. The frightened dog wiggled away from him, squirmed between the passengers, and started for the front of the bus. Here, Ribsy, old boy, come back here, called Henry, and started after him. Eek! A dog! Squealed the lady with the bag of apples. Go away, doggy, go away. Ribsy was scared. He tried to run, and he crashed into the lady's bag of apples. The bag tipped over, and the apples began to roll toward the back of the bus, which was grinding up a steep hill. The apples rolled around the feet of the people who were standing, and passengers began to slip and slide. They dropped their packages, and they grabbed one another. Crash! A high school girl dropped an armload of books. Rattle, bang, crash! A lady dropped a big paper bag. The bag broke open, and pots and pans rolled out. Thud! A man dropped a coil of garden hose. The hose unrolled, and the passengers found it wound around their legs. People were sitting on the floor. They were sitting on books and apples. They were even sitting on other people's laps. Some of them had their hats over their faces and their feet in the air. Screech! The driver threw on the brakes and turned around in his seat just as Henry made his way through the apples and the books and the pans and the hose to catch Ribsy. The driver pushed his cap back on his head. Okay, Sonny, he said to Henry, now you know why dogs aren't allowed on buses. Yes, sir, said Henry in a small voice. I'm sorry. You're sorry? A lot of good that does. Look at this bus. Look at those people. I didn't mean to make trouble, said Henry. My mom said I could keep the dog if I could bring him home on the bus. The fat man began to snicker, and then he chuckled, and then he laughed, and then he roared. He laughed until tears streamed down his cheeks, and all of the other passengers were laughing too, even the man with the hose and the lady with the apples. The driver didn't laugh. Take that dog and get off the bus, he ordered. Ribsy whimpered and tucked his tail between his legs. The fat man stopped laughing. See here, driver, he said, you can't put that boy and his dog off in the rain. Well, he can't stay on the bus, snapped the driver. Henry didn't know what he was going to do. He guessed he'd have to walk the rest of the way home. He wasn't sure that he knew the way in the dark. Just then, a siren screamed. It grew louder and louder until it stopped right alongside the bus. A policeman appeared in the entrance. Is there a boy called Henry Huggins on this bus? He asked. Oh boy, you're going to get arrested for having a dog on the bus, gloated Scooter. I'll bet you have to go to jail. I'm him, said Henry in a very small voice. I am he, corrected the lady with the apples, who had been a school teacher and couldn't help correcting boys. You'd better come along with us, said the policeman. Boy, you are surely going to get it, said Scooter. Surely going to get it. Boy, okay, here's a grammar again. Boy, you are sure going to get it, said Scooter. Surely going to get it, corrected the apple lady. Henry and Ribsy followed the policeman off the bus and into the squad car, where Henry and the dog sat on the back seat. Are you going to arrest me? Henry asked timidly. Well, I don't know. Do you think you ought to be arrested? "No, sir," said Henry politely. He thought the policeman was joking, but he really wasn't sure. It was hard to tell about grown-ups sometimes. "I didn't mean to do anything. I just had to get Ribsy home. My mother said I could keep him if I could bring him home on the bus." "What do you think?" the officer asked his partner, who was driving the squad car. "Well, I think we might let him off this time," answered the driver. "His mother must be pretty worried about him. If she called the police, I don't think she would want him to go to jail. Yes, he's late for dinner already. Let's see how fast we can get him home." The driver pushed a button and the siren began to shriek. Ribsy raised his head and howled. The tires sucked at the wet pavement and the windshield wipers plip-plopped. Henry began to enjoy himself. Wouldn't this be something to tell the kids at school? Automobiles pulled over to the curb as the police officer went faster and faster. Even the bus Henry had been on had to pull over and stop. Henry waved to the passengers. They waved back. Up the hill, the police car sped, and around the corner until they came to Click-it-Clack Street, and then to Henry's block, and then pulled up right in front of his house. Henry's mother and father were standing on the porch waiting for him. The neighbors were looking out of their windows. "Well," said his father after the policeman had gone, "it's about time you came home. So this is Ribsy. I've heard about you, fellow, and there's a big bone and a can of Feely's flea flakes waiting for you." "Henry, what will you do next?" sighed his mother. "Golly, Mom, I didn't do anything. I just brought my dog home on the bus, like you said." Ribsy sat down and began to scratch. Oh, I'm going to really love this book. Let's look at the pictures here because all right, here we have the police car speeding along, and it's going so fast, the trees are blowing because the storm is coming. And that is the first chapter of Henry Huggins. And I know I'm going to like this book because it's fun already. This is Grandma Carla, and I love you.